let Mr. Luckett take it away.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We are here this afternoon to discuss the mid-year budget amendment. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that okay? Okay. So we will be giving you a brief economic update on how things are looking at this point in the year. We'll zero in specifically on our city budget and how we're doing there. We'll turn it over to our departments to go over their budget requests for the mid-year. And then we'll close out by going over what our next steps look like. So in terms of an economic update, this is from kind of a national perspective, looking at employment. So new weekly unemployment claims for December did slow, but they are still elevated. And you can see that before the pandemic, weekly jobless claims, initial claims were at 695,000. As of the end of December, they were still at 787,000 in new weekly claims. In Georgia, the statewide initial unemployment claims for November were lower than October by 47%, which is great news. Fulton County initial claims had dropped by 51% compared to October. Statewide, November showed a net gain of 20,000 jobs compared to October. That's about 0.5%. And in the Atlanta metropolitan statistical area, we saw a net gain of about 22,000 jobs from October to November. So this is a chart that shows you the number of jobs in the Atlanta metropolitan statistical area. So you can see in November, as of November, we were at about 2.8 million jobs, which, as I mentioned before, we had a slight increase from October to November. These are the most recent numbers that are available. The Georgia unemployment rate, as you can see, the unemployment rate for the state as a whole did increase in November from 4.5% to 5.7%. Just a little bit of background behind that. So the total labor force did increase by 81,000 participants. But so you have more people looking for jobs, and most of those people hadn't yet found a job. So that's what caused most of the uptick in the unemployment rate in the state. This chart is 1 month behind the previous chart, so it only goes through October. But again, it shows here, this is just for the Atlanta area. So it shows you that back in October, our unemployment rate was at 4.7%, and that's compared to the state. The state was at 4.5% back in October. So turning our attention to more of the consumer spending and income side of things. So you can see here that personal income fell 1.1% in November. That was the third drop in 4 months. And this chart here kind of shows you that visual depiction of that. You can see personal income is still higher than it was prior to the pandemic. So this decrease is most likely due to the drop in federal aid programs that were enacted earlier this year that are slowly going out. The next slide, we get into consumer spending. Overall, consumer spending dropped about 0.4% in November. So that was the first drop in 7 months. If you zero in specifically on retail sales dropped 1.1% in November from the prior month, and they did go back and revise the October sales to a decline of 0.1%. So the chart that you see here shows total income for each month, and it shows you how that's being spent. As you can see, this blue section here represents savings. So if you take a look at the savings in November, for instance, compared to where we were pre-pandemic, there's still quite a bit of personal savings going on. And then the other area that's interesting here is that you see in the services sector, that was some of the hardest hit areas in our economy. And while we've improved quite a bit, we're still not quite back to the level we were pre-pandemic. And then finally, just giving you an update on consumer confidence. So the latest report from the first half of December showed that consumer confidence had dropped in the first half of December, with the primary reason having to do with just the increasing number of COVID cases. We also wanted to share with you in terms of expectations for the near future. This is a survey that's done by the Wall Street Journal of about 60 different economists and their take on what's coming in the next few months and years, and with some specific questions. So this question specifically was, how do you expect the rollout of the vaccine to affect monthly payrolls? And as you can see here, most economists think that in Q1, the vaccine will have little to no impact on jobs. Whereas if you take a look at Q2, almost half of the economists think that jobs will accelerate substantially in the second quarter. And the other half think that it will have some impact on jobs, but not a substantial one. Similar question, how do you expect the rollout of the vaccine to affect GDP growth? And here, what we see is that some economists think that there'll be a small impact on GDP, but most, over 60% of the economists, think that the more pronounced impact will be seen in Q2. So with that information, just some takeaways. So overall, the economic recovery is slowing. We do know that the federal government recently enacted the $900 billion stimulus plan, and that should help spur some positive economic activity. Personal savings rates, as I mentioned earlier, are still higher than usual, indicating the potential for some future spending boost once confidence returns. And overall, it seems like the second half of 2021 appears that it will be brighter than probably the first half. So with that, we'll move on to just giving you an update on our city budget, and we'll start with the general fund. So we'll start with general fund revenues. As of the November 2020 monthly budget report, which you have in your packet for the committee meeting tomorrow, our revenues in the general fund were about $7 million higher than projections. That's primarily due to sales tax coming in higher than expected, as well as the CARES Act reimbursement that we received from Fulton County. So the CARES Act reimbursement makes up about $4 million of that $7 million, and our sales tax revenues make up about $1.4 million of that $7 million variance that I've mentioned. Just to hit a few of these highlights, our sales tax numbers, as you've seen in the monthly reports that we've sent out, have improved dramatically since the pandemic began. And when we developed our numbers for the FY21 budget, this was back in March, April, right at the beginning of all this, we really tried to be as conservative as possible and expect the worst, because we really didn't have a good idea as to how this would affect our sales tax revenues. So we're pleased to present that things have improved dramatically. The chart here gives you an indication of the percent difference in our sales tax revenue compared to the same month from the prior year. So pre-pandemic, we'd already started seeing a decrease of about 7%. Our low point was in April. That was 30% drop from the prior year, but we've steadily increased with a little bit of plateauing here, but the last couple of months, we've seen some good numbers. So overall, our sales tax collections from July through November, and this is the month of activity, so that's the latest data that we have at this point, are $874,000, or 9.3% higher than our projections. That projection number, when I say projection, is based on the revised budget that you all approved at for the first quarter budget amendment back in November. So as you might remember, you all approved increasing our sales tax revenue budget by $900,000. So even after that increase, with the new numbers that we have since then, we are currently $874,000 ahead still at this point. And this just gives you a chart of our sales tax revenue. So the blue dotted line shows you our actuals for the prior year, FY20. The orange line shows you our budget, and these first 3 months, again, they represent the revised budget that you all approved the last first quarter meeting. But then you can see our budget takes a little more conservative track here. But our actuals represented by the red line, we've consistently been above our revised budget, but still slightly below where we were last year. Moving on to general fund expenditures. As of the November 2020 monthly budget report, expenditures were in line with projected amounts. So we had projected to spend about $31.5 million. Year-to-date actuals are coming in at $27.6 million. Moving on, as you might remember during the first quarter budget amendment, we did go back and look at expenditures and areas where we felt like there were sufficient savings that we could reallocate that for other priorities. And we did, as you might remember, go back and reduce travel related to training as well as training budgets by about $161,000 for the first half of the year. So we did go back through this exercise at this point for the second half of the year. And departments submitted their training and related travel needs for January through June. Those that were designated as essential were funded, and then what was remaining we're recommending for reallocation. So taking a look at that overall, you can see our revised budget. This is reflective of the reduction. This includes the reduction that was taken at the first quarter budget amendment. So our revised budget was at $362,000 overall. We've had $38,000 in actuals from July through December. Departments have anticipated needs of about $167,000 for the second half of the year, most of that being training. And then the remaining part we are recommending for reallocation. So for the departments only, that total comes to $126,000. If the mayor and council wanted to include their portion of the allocation as well, that number would increase to $155,614. We did go back and take a look at all of our other expenditures, personnel, operating, and at this point, we are not recommending any other spending adjustments, mainly because in terms of the personnel side, at this point in the fiscal year, we're not seeing enough personnel savings that we would recommend reducing any further than we already have. And on the operating side, the same recommendation stands. We've taken some reductions in the first quarter, but at this point, we did not see any that we would feel comfortable recommending moving forward. So the next thing I wanted to go over with you all is an updated projection for the general fund for FY 2021. So this is for the full year. And this is similar to what we showed you back at the first quarter, but this includes updated data through December 2020, and the revised budget that you see here, again, reflects what you all approved back at the first quarter budget amendment. So I wanted to go over what the revenues look like first. And so what we've done is that we have our approved budget, we have our revised budget, which reflects any changes that have been made during the fiscal year. And we have two estimates, estimate A and B. And just to kind of give you some context here, so estimate A is really more of what we expect to happen. It's not really aggressive. There's still conservative estimates built into here. It's more of an expected, whereas estimate B includes assumptions that, if things were to take an unexpected turn for the worse, we tried to factor some of that into that estimate B. But estimate A really does reflect what we expect to occur. So just to walk you through here, so kind of high level, our approved revenues when you all adopted the budget back in June, we're at $75.3 million. After the first quarter budget amendment, those numbers increased to 76.5. That was primarily due to sales tax. And then if you look at our estimate A, we are anticipating revenues to come in at $82.3 million, which would be an increase of $5.7 million over the revised budget. Now, just to give you a few bullet points here on what encompasses that $5.7 million. We'll start with property tax. Property tax, as you know, we actually decreased its revenue back at the first quarter, primarily due to how our tax bills were sent out in regards to the digest that we received from Fulton County. That's still the same as we've discussed back then. There are other accounts that fall within this property tax category, and the biggest one that we're seeing an adjustment in is related to the title ad valorem tax. And this is the tax that individuals pay once they register their vehicle. This is the tax that replaced the sales tax on vehicles. And again, going back to when these projections were put together back in early spring at the beginning of the pandemic, we anticipated, probably some fall off in terms of the purchase of vehicles, because this tax as revenue is directly tied to auto sales. What we're seeing is really the opposite. We've seen it kind of be on the same steady pattern as the prior year. And so of this $1.8 million increase or positive variance that we're seeing, about $800,000 of that is directly related to the title ad valorem tax. The other big piece of this is the intangible recording tax, which also falls into the property tax category. This is the revenue that's collected when new mortgage loans are recorded at the county. And we've seen quite a large increase in that starting last year and then carrying on and increasing further into this year. So that is about $860,000 higher than what we'd anticipated. So those are the two main pieces making up that increase in property tax. On the sales tax front, we've, as we talked about, that's coming in quite a bit better than we anticipated. This sales tax number here, the $23.8 million, basically includes us, for the next 2 months, December and January's numbers, that they would come in at 85% of the prior year, with the remainder of the fiscal year coming in at about 90% of the prior year's collections. And we get to $23.8 million. So that would give us $2.2 million more than what we budgeted. On the business tax side, this is the franchise, alcohol, and business taxes. We're anticipating almost $1 million more than what we budgeted. The biggest component of that is our insurance premium tax revenue, which came in, we received that in one payment in October, and it's based off the amount of insurance premiums that are sold in the prior year. So for this year, this revenue came in about $600,000 higher than what we had budgeted. So that's the bulk of that increase there. Moving on down the list, at the intergovernmental category, this is where our CARES Act reimbursement funds from Fulton County were classified. And so you can see that, we received about $3.9 million from Fulton County reimbursing us for CARES Act eligible expenses that we've already spent. At the first quarter budget amendment, we did recognize about $1.2 million of those CARES Act reimbursements, as you all designated the employee compensation to be paid from those funds. So we are recognizing that there, and it leaves about $2.8 million in unallocated or unrecognized CARES Act reimbursements. Those are the largest increases above what we budgeted. There are several that have come in less than what we budgeted, and the biggest one being fines and forfeitures. So our fines from our municipal court are coming in less than expected, and the court's been closed some, but also just the volume of fines has decreased. So we're expecting about $557,000 less than what we budgeted at the start of this year. The other big decrease is in our lease proceeds. And we talked about this, I believe, at the first quarter budget amendment meeting as well. You all approved the purchase of a new ladder truck for the fire department in the 21 budget. However, those take about a year to manufacture. So we won't need to go out for obtain a lease or finance the purchase of that fire truck until next year. So you see a decrease in the lease proceeds on the revenue side, but you'll also see a decrease in the expenditure side, which I'll show you in just a moment. So this next slide reflects the estimate for our expenditures. And you can see, as I mentioned, at this point, we're not recommending any adjustments to or estimating anything less than our budget for salaries and benefits. On the operating side, we have factored in the training and related travel reduction and reallocation that we've spoken about. And on the transfers and other category, again, here is the lease proceeds, either side of that, the expenditure on the fire truck that we won't be needing this year, so that'll be savings. So total savings in the general fund expenditures of about $1.5 million. So this provides you a summary of this overall projection. So as you can see, for our estimate, we had a beginning balance of a little over $28 million. We're anticipating revenues of 82.3, total expenditures of 77.8, which would leave us with an ending fund balance of 32.4 million. We have our reserve by policy, which is our emergency reserve, 25% of our expenditures at a little over 18 million. We have the 1.6 million that we've set aside for financial uncertainty at the beginning of the budget process. So based on all these new numbers, that leaves us an ending balance over reserve of about $12.8 million. So to take all that and to kind of summarize it even more, to make it a little more digestible, we've broken it down into categories just to give you a little better optics on this. So on the operating side, what we're saying is this is a summary of the available funding based on our estimate of revenues and expenditures for the full FY21. So based on that projection, that would leave available $4.9 million to be used for operating type expenses, and it would leave $3.42 million available for capital or other one-time uses. So that's a total of $8.3 million. I did want to point out that this capital and other one-time uses category, the $3.42 million, that includes the $2.8 million in unrestricted CARES reimbursement funds that the city received from Fulton County, which may be used for any purpose. But I wanted to make sure you all knew that those funds are included in that number. The other piece, as you can remember here, we had a bottom line number of $12.8 million. $8.3 million we're saying is available. We are recommending that we reserve our prior year savings. These are savings that came about from FY20 for allocation to capital projects in the upcoming FY22 budget process. And that's been our practice for years now, that our capital projects, one-time capital projects that we fund in the upcoming budget process are typically funded through savings from the prior year. I mean, we're recommending to continue that approach coming up. We also wanted to give you an update on our other funds, and we should be able to move through this pretty quickly. So for the solid waste fund, these are as of our November monthly budget report. You can see that actual revenues are ahead of our projections. We're at 4.8 million, our projections are at 4.7. And on the expenditure side, our actual expenditures are coming in less than projected. In our water and sewer fund, our revenues are right on target with our projections, and our expenditures are coming in less than what we projected at this point in the fiscal year. In the stormwater fund, again, our revenues are right on target at 1.4 million, and expenditures are coming in less than projected at 1.3 million. I want to take just a brief moment, spend a little more time here on the Recreation Participation Fund. So this fund probably has had the biggest impact to it in terms of effects from COVID-19, just from the department's ability to be able to offer programming. And so we wanted to give you a better update this go around. This chart here kind of gives you a comparison of year over year. So FY20, which is the most recently completed fiscal year, revenues were almost $1 million less than where they were in FY 2019. And on the expenditure side, our expenses for FY20 were about $825,000 lower than where they were in FY19. And then if you look at FY20 just by itself, our expenses exceeded our revenues by a little over $800,000. And so this fund balance in this fund absorbed that revenue shortfall and was used to continue to support the operations of that fund in FY 2020. To give you an update for this current fiscal year, so as of the November monthly budget report, the revenues, as you can see, it looks pretty well. Our revenues are right on target. Expenditures are coming in a little below where we projected. But when we take a look at our preliminary numbers through December, what we're seeing is that the fund is still in a positive financial position, but really by only about a $20,000 difference. And so our finance department and the Recreation and Parks department has been monitoring this and meeting on a monthly basis to discuss the numbers. We do have a recommendation for you this evening. I'm going to leave that for Mr. Leatherman to present during his portion of the presentation. So with that, we're going to move on to the requests for mid-year as well as the first quarter requests that were deferred from that meeting back in November. So we will start with the administration department, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Fisher to present these requests.
Thank you, Mr. Luckett. Thank you to Mayor and Council for this time that we can go over what our budget requests are for the upcoming year. Some of these you've seen before that are still very important to us. Some of these are kind of new. This first one that you see, the GIS on-call support for security implementation, I want to thank Patrick Baber for coming up with this, but I also want to thank Patrick for not having to use it. So I am asking that we do not fund this item. Our GIS system through Esri, the company that we used, put into place some security measures that really changed every aspect of our GIS system, everything that it touched, whether it be public safety, whether it be our water department, transportation, all of the different areas. I referred to it, for those of you that remember, when Y2K came through, almost everything that they did had an opportunity to touch something in our GIS system. Patrick was planning ahead to have to get some professional help if our GIS went dark because of these changeovers. He did everything that he could and everything that he could find to implement the new security. And when the changeover came, we stayed up and we continued to work. So we're not asking for this money at this time. I will say if something does come up and there's any kind of a hiccup in the future, we might be back, but I don't see that happening. He did a phenomenal job in preparing our system. So that first one for the on-call support for security implementation, we are not asking for those funds. And Patrick did a phenomenal job on that. So the next item you've seen before is the equipment for our municipal complex marshal. We have a new marshal after almost 10 years. Officer Chuck Jones has been here and recently retired. So we have to outfit that new officer. Of course, it was not in the budget. We didn't know at the beginning of the year of this personnel change. So it's $2,800 for equipment. That also covers things like vests, the vest cover that they wear, duty belt, the equipment that goes in their firearm, that kind of equipment, and then uniforms for the complex marshal. They're not the same size, so we've got to get some uniforms for them, so that's $1,000. The next item that you'll see is the added funding for legal fees. I don't think you've seen this one yet, but this is a normal item that we put into our mid-year budget. At the beginning of the year, we don't budget all of our legal fees because quite frankly, we don't know what those are going to be throughout the year. So we come to you at mid-year based on what we know at this point, and then there'll be another amendment at the end of the year to finish up the last 6 months of the year. Right now, it's a $90,000 request that we need to put in there for legal fees. The big ones, and you're all aware of these, that take up the funds is like the T-Mobile lawsuit. That continues to go on. We need funding for that. There's another lawsuit or legal battle that's been going on with the definition of part-time versus full-time for our firefighters. And so that's in the legal department right now. And then, of course, RAPSTIC is coming up, and we're starting to get some bills out of that. So we're looking at $90,000 now, and we'll see how the rest of the year comes out. But this is a normal request that we do every year. From the operating standpoint, some of the things that were deferred, I talked to you before about operation and maintenance of our security system. We need $10,000 so that we can update some of the circuit boards. We've had a couple of outages. They're getting old. They're very hard to find the parts. When we have the outages on these boards now, we're going back to manual keys. Sometimes we're having to issue manual keys for people to get in and out of certain areas. The system needs to have updates. It's a great system. It works good. It's just getting old. And we need to have some funds in there so that we can start upgrading the circuit boards. The next one is increased funding for building operation and maintenance of $20,000. Our last big update in that fund was in 2011. So we've been trying to cover costs for that time. It's getting where it's a bigger number. We just can't quite cover the increase in costs anymore. So that is just an operational request for the maintenance. When we move into capital, we've piecemealed the FCA, the Citywide Facilities Maintenance Plan, to go along to get those things that we absolutely had to have to keep our facilities from degrading. We've done that. You've unfroze some of the money that we froze earlier. $818,000 is the funds that are requested to finish out this year. You know that's an annual program that is done by a professional outside agency, and we follow that program. This will get us complete with the programs to not only maintain the outside structure of our facilities, but also the insides of them, and to keep them updated. The other capital item is a new one for us. It's the Wi-Fi infrastructure that we have here within the city of Roswell. And when I say Wi-Fi, I'm not talking about just a hotspot that you go on to cruise on the internet. This is our core wireless system. All of the wireless in the building, all of the wireless that we use in other buildings. That system is old. We have been going through a very methodical approach to updating our servers, updating our switches, updating our fiber ring. This is the next step. It's $600,000, and that will get our core wireless, our public Wi-Fi that we use out in the parks, all of our wireless systems up to a current level of service, which is what we need. The other capital items that were deferred, we have not yet been able to fund, is the installation of the cameras for the City Hall parking area. That's this area out here, both of the front parking lots. The parking lot over on the HR side of the building is where we are asking citizens to park when they go over to Canton Street. We've heard repeatedly that we put up the lights along the walkway as much as we can. We don't have any cameras, any coverage out in the parking lot. And then the parking lot over on the side over here where you come in now for the public is where our 911 operators park. In many of the employees, when we come in the mornings at this time of year, it's dark. The 911 people come in, they have different shifts. It's dark when they come in, it's dark when they leave. We have it lit the best we can. We need some additional security out there. Those cameras can also be used and tied into our security system for other types of police activity, where they can go back and monitor and look back and see what is captured on those cameras within their system. So it's an upgrade that we've got to get done at some point. The final item for the capital that was deferred was for the upgrade for security that we have at Hembry for our our Public Works gate and the entrances. That's really the remaining building we have that is a business type building that has it's just not secured right now. You can drive in, you can drive around back. We have equipment out there, we have vehicles out there, people can go in and out back there with no means of security at all. There'll be some employee gates and some motorized vehicle gates that can actually put the security to that property like it should be to protect our assets that are out there. And I think those are all of the capital items that I have in the operating request for administration.
Any questions at this point?
Did council have any questions for Mr. Fisher? We'll move on to the next department.
I think there's one question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see everybody.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
You want to share your screen, or Ryan, you want to share the screen?
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Ryan, just a quick question, or Mr. Fisher. There was a request for IT switches for the city. Is any of these IT things related to that, or this is all unrelated?
No, we got that finished. That was something that did get, one of the things that we did move forward with even back when COVID started was one of the essentials was to get our switches updated. Thank goodness we did. Everything worked really well during our remote working and is continuing to work well. So thank you for asking that. But yeah, they actually got that completed and it's running really well. So it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about here.
Okay, these are just all new, different kind of switches and things that need.
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Additional questions from council? I think I can see everybody now, so now we'll move on to the next department.
Thank you all.
Okay, the next department would be community development.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is Lenore Bromberg. We have three operating requests that were deferred from the first quarter. The first is to increase funding for codifying the UDC text amendments. This is funds that are required in order to incorporate the more than 20 text amendments that we have that have been passed by council over the past little more than 12 months. If we do not have those funds, those would just be PDFs that are up on the website and would not be incorporated into the overall text that our residents and business owners would be able to see on the website. The second item is to add a full-time building plans reviewer position at 42% funding. Of course, this is a recurring position at just under $40,000. This is going to be a second plan review position for the building division with the intent to allocate project assignments such that many of the smaller projects, which normally only take a couple of days to review, would not have to be in the same queue with our larger projects. So we would hope to be able to expedite those plan reviews and get a lot of those smaller projects out from our review and comment period in a shorter time frame than we're capable of doing today. And then the third item is software and hardware for digital plan review. Because during COVID, we have moved today to receiving nearly all of our permit applications and plan reviews. Plan submittals are done via email, so they are in PDF form. Those are all being reviewed digitally on screen as opposed to receiving paper copies. The software and the hardware would allow for staff to better be able to utilize that plan review with marking up the plans and so forth. The software is Bluebeam software, which the fire department is currently using for doing their plan reviews and have had really great success with it. This is at just under $3,000. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Does council have any questions? Thank you, Ms. Bromberg. Next up.
Okay, next we have our police department.
Anybody on for the PD? I don't see anybody. Okay, move on, Ryan.
Okay. Next would be Recreation and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Luckett. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Want to just touch on a handful of items that we have as part of our Recreation and Parks request, and tying in similar to the conversation that you just heard from Mr. Fisher as it relates to contract services in the first two items and the supplies to maintain parks and trails. We too have covered a number of increases over really the last 4 or 5 years where we haven't had an increase in this area of our budget. And we're starting to see those reoccurring expenses just to maintain our facilities, buying equipment, buying toilet paper and paper towels, as well as contract services for various areas of our elevator maintenance, pool filtration, and mats in different facilities that prevent slip and fall accidents to increase over time for a variety of reasons. And so we're requesting an increase to our operating costs associated with these two line items in our budget. Over the past 6 months, we've been reviewing our payroll and scheduling process. Currently, we use only a manual process for all of our payroll throughout the city. For our department, roughly about 100 full-time staff members and 100 part-time and seasonal staff members, especially in the spring, summer, and fall. It's a tremendous amount of work through Excel sheets and paper time clocks. And through our review, we have found payroll and scheduling software in order to streamline our payroll and timekeeping process for all of our hourly staff members. The implementation of that is about $60,000 to purchase the software and roughly $25,000 a year in annual operating costs. We estimate just the time savings alone for sure will cover the ongoing $25,000 software costs associated with that and may get close to covering the $60,000 as well in the implementation. We're requesting this now at mid-year so that we can get the process stood up in preparation for our summer operating season when we bring on the lion's share of our seasonal and part-time staff. Mr. Luckett covered just the overall recreation participation fund, and as he indicated earlier, we're sitting at about $20,000 or so positive revenue in that fund. As we look at the next 6 months of operating, we know that we are right on the borderline of revenue and expenses, and the current expenses also include our response to coronavirus. And so as part of this mid-year budget request, we're requesting $73,000 of the CARES Act money to be transferred from the general fund into the enterprise fund to cover our costs associated with our response to coronavirus. As it relates to our capital requests, you'll see a number of line items here in the next 2 slides. And really what we're seeing is we've deferred a lot of these, what I would call normal capital requests that we have approved in our annual budget at the beginning of the year, and as well are reviewed at mid-year. Our first, which was a deferred item with the light pole replacement out at East Roswell Park. We have a number of old wooden light poles in our facilities, and we'd like to continue our process of replacing those so that we can continue to keep a safe environment for our community as it relates to those light poles. On the capital side, for new requests, our Recreation and Park Maintenance Program, this is normally what we refer to as the 385 plan. Generally, we request about $385,000 in annual revenue resources to maintain our roughly 1,000 acres of parkland. And so this is the improvements of our existing facilities as you start to talk about sidewalks and asphalt, tennis courts, fences, irrigation system, all falls into this category. We had about $88,000 approved in our first quarter budget review for some high risk, high need items. And this is continuing to show itself as we defer a lot of our maintenance items. We need to tackle them now so that they don't become safety issues or hazard issues or just start to stack up here in the next 6 months into next year as well. Trail repairs is another item. We've seen a lot of erosion due to rain along the Chattahoochee River and some of our creeks and channels. Normally, we set aside about $10,000 in our operating budget. We have since expensed that $10,000 in the repairs, and so we're looking for another $12,000 to get us through this next half of the fiscal cycle to deal with equipment. This is materials, wood, and decomposed crush and run in order to deal with erosion issues in our parks and facilities and trails. For a number of years, we have methodically gone through our asphalt replacement program. Right now, we have the parking lot on Manhattan across the street from Woodstock Park that is due for replacement. This $60,000 does replace that parking lot, which is essentially the highest degraded facility within our parking lot areas that are not covered in other funding sources. Our small equipment replacement program was also deferred. This is a replacement program that replaces all of our mowers and small equipment that we use to maintain our facilities. A lot of those pieces of equipment are in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 years old, and we need to continue to replace them so that our staff have the right equipment to be able to do their jobs. Our historic house maintenance properties, if you recall, we have about a 5-year plan that we've been running through. We've got 2 projects on the items or on the list this year. One is a repair of the ice house on the backside of Barrington Hall. And then we have some trail erosion issues around Barrington Hall that we would like to tackle as part of that line item. And the system-wide park improvements, this is the beautification plan. So this is where we buy all of our picnic tables, benches, drinking fountains, and we continue to repair kind of the worst is first in this case. And we've got a number of picnic tables that have just gotten to the point to beyond their useful life. Got a handful of barbecues that have essentially rusted out the bottom and aren't usable that we need to be able to replace. And then for a number of years, we've been working on our heavy equipment. The mini excavator is in need of replacement. This piece of equipment is roughly about 15 years old, has run its useful life, and we struggle to keep it up and running when we can. And this is a piece of equipment that we're using on a regular basis, really weekly, if not daily, in order to maintain our facilities. And as we go on with the capital replacement, as you recall, we have a number of blue light emergency phones in our parks and facilities, primarily along the river, as well as out of the Big Creek Greenway. We need to transfer those from the 3G network to the 4G network. This is essentially something that is mandated by the carriers, and it does cost about $5,000 to upgrade, or $50,000 to upgrade the 10 stanchions, or roughly $5,000 a piece. Mimosa Hall facility improvement. As you all know, we've been working through our certificate of occupancy process for Mimosa Hall. This line item does include the pool and filling in the pool. We estimate that to be roughly about $40,000 of that line item. What we don't know, which is also included in there, is an $8,000 line item to do a soils assessment underneath the pool. The biggest challenge with that pool facility is we just don't know what's under it. So we've got to be able to understand the soil conditions so that we can fill it in correctly and safely. Both of those items are included in that certificate of occupancy line item there. The Docks Cafe fund, this is the infrastructure. Once we relocate Docks Cafe, if you recall, Mayor and Council had approved the general location of where Docks Cafe will go based on the future project that transportation is working through. And these are the utility items that we need to do during the construction process so that we have the site prepared. This does not include the cost of the relocation of Docks Cafe, just the infrastructure associated with that project. We are looking also for funding of the strategic master plan. As you recall, or you may recall, that our current master plan expires this year. This is our 5-year parks master plan. For us to be able to project forward on Mayor and Council's goals and objectives, but also leveraging the current strategic plan and the public input process that was done this last year. This will give us our 5-year strategic plan of park improvements, as well as any additional park-related assets that we should be looking at in the future for consideration. Mr. Fisher talked briefly about lights around the Municipal Hall complex. We kind of split the responsibilities of grounds and buildings as it relates to the municipal complex. Previously, we had a lot of feedback on how can we create additional safety opportunities when people are transitioning between and around City Hall, especially in the evening as they're trying to make it to Canton Street, potentially using City Hall as a parking lot. This also dovetails in behind the Hawk Crossing project. And as we start to see potentially more traffic in and around City Hall grounds, it's our recommendation that we install the similar emergency phone system that we have along the park system to provide a safety opportunity for people that may need to contact 911, especially in the evening time, and create that experience of safety in and around the grounds of the Municipal Hall complex. We've also found 2 eroded stormwater pipes at East Roswell Park, and we've added that to the list. This is a new item from about 3 weeks ago. During some heavy rain and some erosion issues, we discovered this pipe underneath the footbridge, or these 2 pipes underneath the footbridge, and have an estimate of $34,000 to repair those pipes so that we can continue to maintain the trail system in good working order. I think that's the end of mine, and I'd be happy to answer any questions should you have any.
Council have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. Thank you, Mr. Leatherman, for the presentation. And I think this question is actually from Mr. Harner. It has to do with the payroll and scheduling software. Is there anything that is being used in the city for this purpose already, or is it something that the city should consider citywide versus just a department, or is this something that will be able to be used citywide even though it's budgeted in this department?
I can tackle that one. So we put a group together that included fire, PD, and administrative services to look at the software options. What we found in that conversation is that our business operations are very different, and the same tool doesn't necessarily work across platforms into either PD or fire or admin. And part of it is on my end with the seasonal nature of the variety of staff that we have, that we'll have staff working in multiple different areas of our operations in different budget units. So we'll have staff that's working in the pool one day and then potentially working in a community center in a different day. And we actually bill them to different areas of our budget so that we can track our expenses appropriately. And that's what this software piece for us does. And so we did look at that as part of our review in advance of making the recommendation.
Councilmember Hall, some of the other departments, as Mr. Lesman just said, were invited not only to the first meeting, but it's still open to them if they see that there's a benefit. But if you're pretty much a fairly straightforward scheduling, it's just not as advantageous as it is for Rec and Parks and the amount of variation that they have. And like Mr. Lesman said, there may be people that are actually working different jobs at different times. But if there is any ability to have advantage in other departments or even divisions for that matter, it is something that can be multiplied into those other departments or divisions.
So just my follow-up question to that is, the city has to use some kind of sophisticated software for time tracking. And is the company that provides that, are they able to provide something to Rec and Parks, or why do we have to have a completely separate software?
Not at the level that we're talking about, because if you think about the software that we have right now, it's part of our ERP, so it does a lot of things really good, but it's not advanced and expert just for timekeeping. And for most everybody, that works really well. But in the situation like with Rec and Parks, it's not general. They really do have an issue with the amount of scheduling, so they need something that has more expertise. So we looked at a third party for that. In general, what we have works very well. People put in their time. It's electronic. It adds it up. You come out with the paycheck when you're done. But to schedule at the level that Mr. Leatherman has to, we had to go to a third party to look for that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, a couple of things. I would like to, see like the ERP, back to the same question of Councilmember Hall. So it seems like the ERP that we have today does not have any module that you can attach to provide the service that Mr. Leatherman needs.
That's correct. At the level that he needs it at, the ERP doesn't provide it at that level. To get to that level, we've got to go to somebody that does specifically that type of scheduling and payroll.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Ledham, I want to take you back to the Mimosa Hall facility improvement for certificate of occupancy, $270,422. Could you please open this in what it is, the grounds and the landscaping, and what will be for the building itself, if you don't mind, please?
Sure. So the building, so essentially subtract $40,000 from the whole. The building represents $230,000, which is specific to the improvements necessary to meet code requirements. And we estimate, based on everything that we know today, without having the ability to do the subsurface exploration, essentially the soil test, we estimate roughly about $40,000 to demo and fill in the pool and make it safe. Sorry, Councilmember Zapata, you're still muted.
Right, thanks for letting me know. I'm sorry about that. So, so the $40,000 will include any other groundwork or landscaping around the house, or just for the pool and the surrounding area of the pool only?
Just for the pool and surrounding the area of the pool. Now, we do have a landscape contractor that is currently maintaining the grounds of Mimosa Hall in its current condition, but this is no improvements to the grounds. And if you recall, we had a long conversation, I couldn't tell you when, about the cobble driveway leading up to the home itself. It's been identified as a potential trip and fall hazard, but it also has very significant historical value and aesthetic value. We don't know quite what to do and what the recommendations are to that cobblestone driveway. That will take some extensive review and public input process on how to tackle it. And so essentially are planning to leave that in place, but then sign it accordingly to at least draw attention to the condition of that driveway, so people are careful when they're walking across it or on it. That's just one of the many examples, but this essentially renders the property walkable, usable in its current condition, taking away primarily that safety hazard of the pool, but then also allowing the first floor of the home to be occupied by the general public.
Thank you.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So I have some similar questions, but just want to expand a little more. So, Mr. Leatherman, as you know, I had a sticking point with the fact that the residents in a public meeting were told one thing about 2 years ago or so, and really the question back then was, what will it take to get the park and just the outside able to be open to the public? And I've heard some different numbers over the years. I've heard different concerns on kind of why staff wasn't opening it. So I just want to make sure I'm crystal clear that you feel if this council approves $40,000, that will take away the pool safety issue. The only other discussion point will be, how should we handle the cobblestone driveway? But other than that, do you have confidence that there's no other safety issue that prevents this from opening up the same way that Bullock Hall and Barrington and the Smith Plantation are open grounds?
So I won't say this exactly probably as you expected. If all of our facilities have some level of risk associated with them when you're accessing them. As the director, if we fill the pool in, I would feel confident in opening the facility similar to our other all of our other parks and facilities, that the level of risk is consistent with our other facilities while accessing them. Mimosa Hall has some very specific challenges. As you recall, in previous conversations, we talked about camera infrastructure, which doesn't exist. Those types of recommendations are coming as part of our next year's budget, as well as we don't have any funding within the operation for part-time staff associated with Mimosa Hall and accessing the grounds for using it for events or facilities. And so that is a future discussion in the next budget year. But primarily, as your discussion and your question is related to the safety and the occupancy, if we were to fill the pool in, as the director, I would be able to give you that recommendation that we can safely access the grounds of that facility with certain limitations. Again, if you recall on the backside of the facility, there's an old maintenance road, and then it starts to slope down to the creek. I wouldn't want the public to be accessing those areas. We would have to sign them and fence them and make them secure, similar to our other facilities.
So I appreciate that. I'd say you did directly answer the question, because as we discussed in one of those one of those previous public meetings, you had brought up the there's no video cameras, et cetera, but those are consistent with other houses. The fact that we have some other historic homes that also don't have that. So my goal is just to get things consistent and really open up more park space to the taxpayers that bought it. So I appreciate answering that. My only other item, since we were talking about splitting out, just as I wanted to understand the 40K request here to open up the outside. Mr. Luckett, I don't need the answer now. This is just a follow-up prior to next time we'll discuss this. But the same way that Mr. Leatherman just broke out the outside cost versus the inside cost, I'd want to understand the, you've lumped travel and education together, even though within the budget, those are separate line items. So I would want to make sure to see that same table that you provided. Next time, I want to be able to see that where it's actually separated out the way it is in the actual budget. Thank you, Mr. Leatherman and Mr. Luckett.
Additional questions from council? Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you very much, Mr. Leatherman. Question, I know we're all excited to have the grounds open going into the spring, having the possibility of that. I just wanted a little bit more detail on what the accessibility and the extent of the renovations and activities that will be allowed inside the house with this with these funds that are being allocated. What sort of renovations, or is it just structural to make it safe to enter?
Thank you for the question. So the $270,000 again anticipates occupancy on the first floor, primarily ADA access and structural access, as well as some ADA parking in order to accommodate safe path of travel for people accessing the first floor of that building. We've got to repair and replace a restroom facility inside the building to make it accessible. We've got to do some work just with thresholds to make sure that, again, it's around accessibility. And then we've got some structural issues that we need to tackle in order to occupy it. I don't have the actual occupancy load right off the top of my head. I want to say it's sub 100 as far as people accessing the first floor of the building and facility. And the intent would be to operate it in conjunction with the grounds of Mimosa Hall and our other historic assets as a community gathering and rental space for different facilities. And I really believe that the best leverage of Mimosa Hall property really comes with the grounds and the house working together so that you have a place of indoor refuge for activities and special events when we're able to do those. And we're not 100% isolated to the outdoor space. That also being said, we've got the challenge of COVID around us, and we also know that we have the solar panel project that is coming. And so now is a really good opportunity to get to the point where both the grounds and that first floor are ready to be occupied, and we can do the construction roughly around the same time that the solar panels are going onto the roof. At some point here, even if we're able to open the grounds, we're going to have to manage a construction site with solar panels. And so if we're able to kind of do all of these projects at once, certificate of occupancy on the first floor, pool and grounds, and solar panels, I think we've got a great opportunity moving forward to start to recover some of the investment that Mayor and Council have authorized financially onto that property moving forward. We've also reallocated and redesigned our historic asset staff to accommodate the future opening of this space, where we've taken our coordinator positions and generalized them so that they're not house specific. Again, we had talked just briefly as we're looking at next year's budget recommendations, we will have some part-time staff recommendations in order for the operation of Mimosa Hall, assuming that the certificate of occupancy gets done. But we don't anticipate any full-time staff at this point in time associated with that facility based on the way that we've reorganized that division.
Additional questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Leatherman. It's my understanding we've got the police department on the call now, so we will go back to Public Safety.
Hello, Mayor and Council. I apologize, I wasn't aware of that. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I wasn't aware that I was going to be doing this meeting, so just bear with me. The first request is to add a full-time K-9 sergeant's position. As you guys remember, when they did the last study, it was recommended that we add this position just based on the high sensitivity and the special skills training that's required for our K-9s. That would be an additional full-time position, and their primary function would be to supervise the operation and the very specific training that goes along with the K-9 program. The second operating is the addition of a full-time internal affairs investigator position. This is to add someone. Right now, our Office of Professional Standards, they do both the hiring, they do all of our internal affairs investigations, all the background investigations, so they're really kind of taxed and not really specializing in the internal affairs investigations process. So this position, this person will be designated specifically for internal investigations, reviewing all complaints that come into the police department, just to make sure that that transparency is there for the public. The next capital item is the handgun optic sight transition. This is to allow better accuracy and better target acquisition for officers if the need for use of force is presented to them. It's approximately about a month-and-a-half process per firearm by the time they go and mill the items and get the optics set up. And there is a transition and some training that gets done with that, but it is much, much more accurate than a normal iron sight system, especially for officers that have eye issues or wear glasses. The ability to look at both the target and the sight is greatly improved. Next, we have the Law Enforcement Center front and rear gate control access replacement. Both control arms and motors for the gates for the police department are extremely old and break fairly frequently. This is obviously a problem. We've actually had one incident where both the front and back gate broke at the same time. This either prevents officers from being able to leave the facility and or enter the facility, which is obviously a big problem for us. We have looked at having both replaced, which obviously comes to the $20,000 to be able to do that. Lastly is the long distance weapon platform upgrade. These are to replace aging sniper rifles for the SWAT team. Each barrel for a firearm only is good for so long. At this point, the long distance weapon platforms that we have are reaching their end of life. So as that happens, the measure of accuracy of each round fired out of that firearm begins to decrease. So for example, if you're firing a round at 100 meters, instead of being within 1 meter of accuracy or 1 inch of accuracy, it starts to spread. Obviously for the SWAT team and they're possibly taking hostage shots or something that requires a very precision accuracy weapon, that becomes a very big problem. So we're putting in to replace both of those 2 long distance weapons platforms as well.
Those are all the police items, Mayor.
Thank you. I was waiting to get unmuted. Does council have any questions? I don't see any hands raised, so then we'll continue with transportation.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, City Council. So the first item we have for transportation is to add funding for the contracted maintenance of right-of-way on Holcomb Ridge Road, Highway 92, and along 400. We were requesting $50,000. So on this first item, there was some confusion on the location. So staff is requesting to remove the request from the discussion tonight. We'll bring it back later at a future discussion if we need it. So that's one less for you to worry about tonight. The next request is the citywide road resurfacing and reconstruction program at $2 million. So typically the city spends around $1.2 to $1.8 million of local funds every year on resurfacing. With that level of funding over the years, we have created a backlog of streets waiting to be resurfaced. You were briefed on the details of that backlog and how to reduce it at the Transportation Committee meeting back in February of 2020. So for the current fiscal year, due to COVID, we only got a little over $500,000 of local money for resurfacing. So this additional $2 million being requested today will be very helpful. Additionally, with your approval, we recently applied for an up to $5 million of GTIP loan to try to do some catching up on the resurfacing backlog. So this $2 million request tonight, if you approve it, will make our loan application stronger by showing a serious commitment from the city towards its resurfacing program. The last request is a zero-turn mower replacement at $11,000. So that's just a routine maintenance equipment we have. It has completed its useful life. It's just very high maintenance now. We request one of these every couple of years, so this one is a little overdue now. So that's the last request from Transportation. Are there any questions?
Council have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. Thank you, Director Ralph. Can you tell us, do we know what our LMIG match is for this last round?
So yeah, that LMIG match is about $254,000, and that actually got taken care of as part of the Q1 review that you approved already. So we don't necessarily need any part of this $2 million to get the full benefit out of the LMIG. We are getting the GDOT LMIG at the full maximum possible amount already with what the City Council has approved already as part of the Q1 review.
And what is that amount?
The local amount is $254,000, and what we are getting from the state is about $850,000, somewhere around that range.
So with this 2 million, we'll be somewhere close to 3.5 million in road resurfacing funds.
Yes.
Thank you.
Correct.
Additional questions? Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to start seeing also on the radar some funds for Grind Bridge mitigation for the Georgia 400 Express Lane. So I don't know if you're keeping in mind this and start thinking about a budget for studies or for mitigation options that we need to take in consideration, but also I would like to keep it on the radar, this item. So maybe when we talk next time about that, I would like to see something about it. Thank you.
Yeah, we absolutely have that in our minds, and we are working on a plan. You may see a request related to that in the FY22 conversations that are going to start soon.
Additional questions from council? Thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Luckett.
Thank you, Mayor. So that concludes all of the requests that we've received from departments. Moving on, we did want to go back to our partner organizations. We discussed that at the first quarter, and we have another request at the mid-year as well. As you might remember, a lot of their funding was reduced during the original budget process because of everything going on with COVID. We gave partner organizations the option to submit additional requests at the first quarter as well as for mid-year. This chart gives you an overview of what those funding levels look like. The green column here shows you what has been approved, and that includes what got approved at the first quarter. So you all approved an additional $40,000 for the Roswell Arts Fund, bringing their total up to $90,000. That left in terms of unfunded compared to what they originally requested post-COVID. $130,000 was unfunded, $5,500 was unfunded for historic Roswell beautification project. We have received one request from the Roswell Arts Fund for the mid-year to be considered. They've requested $25,000. And Mayor, I believe we have someone that's available to speak to that at this time.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, good evening, and thank you, Mayor and Council. So, as Mr. Luckett said, just for clarification, as you know, over the past few months, we have submitted a number of iterations of our budget asks at the request of the City and Finance Department. The $62,000 that were discussed at the last budget review were specifically for Q2 needs. Of those, City Council approved 40,000, bringing the total city support to 90,000 of the original 250,000 requested, which is roughly 36%. So this is still a significant decrease in the necessary support that we received from the city. But despite the many challenges that this past year brought on, including the funding cuts, I am very proud to say that the team of Roswell Arts Fund didn't skip a beat. And in fact, we delivered several new programs that addressed important needs of our community members, bringing some joy and connection through the arts throughout the city, catering specifically to seniors, partnering with businesses, going into different neighborhoods and highlighting local artists. And all of this in ways that are safe and accessible to everyone. So the $25,000 that you see today is the amount that we are requesting to bridge us over to the end of FY21, with the hope that FY22 will bring new strength to our partnership and reflect our role in the recovery and growth of our community. Thank you. That is my dog.
Thank you. Does council have any questions? Not seeing any hands up, I'll go back to you, Mr. Luckett.
Thank you, Mayor. So those are all of the requests that we have for your consideration this evening. Just to summarize what we've talked about, both from an available funding perspective to the actual requests that we've received. So on the operating side, as we told you, we are estimating about $4.9 million in available funding. We've received mid-year budget requests totaling $634,000. And of course, based on a couple of the changes that have occurred this evening, that amount goes down by about $82,000. So that's down to around $550,000 in total operating requests. That would leave roughly $4.2 million remaining available. On the one-time use side, including capital and any other one-time uses, we have $3.4 million available. That includes, again, the CARES funding reimbursement that we received from Fulton County, as well as some additional dollars. And then we have received $4.7 million in mid-year requests for capital projects, which of course is surpassing that by $1.3 million. If council decides to, we can use operating funding for one-time capital, other one-time uses. We just would not want to go the opposite way. We wouldn't want to use one-time sources to fund operating expenses. So with that, we have total available funding of about $8.3 million, total requests of 5.3 less the 82, which would bring us to about $2.9 million remaining, just to summarize kind of everything you've heard this evening. And then finally, we do have one request from one of our internal service funds related to the Environmental Public Works Department. And I'll turn that over to EPW.
Thank you, Mr. Luckett. Can you hear me okay? So I hope this will be a brief one, but inadvertently, we did not get our capital request in for tool and auto repair equipment replacement for the shop. This was largely due to a transition in staff that was going on during the budgeting process, and quite frankly, I missed it going through the first quarter update. This is to repair basically old or tools and equipment that break, as well as new tools and equipment that are required to service newer model vehicles. Our new fleet services manager has noted that and has a list of small tools and replacement equipment that we need to keep maintaining the fleet. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Council have any questions? Thank you. Mr. Luckett, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, Mayor, I just have one slide left here. And before I wrap things up, I just wanted to answer Councilmember Palermo's question on the training and travel. So of the $155,000 that we are recommending for reallocation, the travel component of that totals $85,873. And the training portion totals $69,740. And so with that, just talking about next steps, we are again here this evening to request guidance from you all on the mid-year budget requests based on the feedback that we received this evening. And if council directs us, we'll be back to you at the next meeting on January 25th with a mid-year budget amendment for your consideration and review. With that, I'll be glad to answer any other questions. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Luckett. I appreciate the presentation and all the work done by staff. I think it's, good news to hear that we're in a relatively healthy financial position coming out of the pandemic, but as we consider the additional expenditures, I was just curious, as you're looking into FY22, if you're projecting, a normal budget year, or if it's still with a reduction in the budget. I realize you don't have a crystal ball, and if you did, you would be in very high demand everywhere. But I'm just curious in kind of what you're thinking and what you're anticipating looking ahead.
At this point, I think that I would not say that we anticipate a return to normal for FY22. I think that we're seeing trends now that show that we are getting close to that, but I expect it to be still kind of muted in terms of we can be close, but we're still going to be feeling the effects of everything that's happened. And of course, as you said, all that goes with the caveat of if things were to get worse in the next few months or something like that, that could definitely, that uncertainty definitely adds a level of complexity. But just in terms of the trends that we're seeing, I think we're headed in the right direction.
I think the answer is we still need to take a very conservative approach going forward in the next few months. So, thank you.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So if I have a good recollection, during the quarterly review budget, we talk about economic development position, that we will be reviewing this or discussing this again during the mid-year budget review or amendment. And I couldn't see anything on your presentation about the economic development position that I will continue advocating for. So I would like to know if it's here that I missed it, or we need to add it when it comes for the next mayor and council discussion on the next meeting.
Well, I believe that item was among the list of items that were brought forward by, I think you, Councilmember Zapata, Councilmember Hall, and Councilmember Palermo. Tonight, we're free to discuss that up to the mayor, but we were presenting to you what the departments have brought forward in terms of their requests and giving you an update on our budget. But I'm glad to answer any questions about those items if you have those questions.
Councilmember Palermo.
Mr. Luckett, thank you for a great presentation to all department heads. I think very helpful. I share Councilmember Wilsey's optimism that the numbers that you provided from a revenue standpoint look better than, probably we all initially projected. And at the same time, I certainly share Councilmember Wilsey's thoughts as well of making sure we are looking at taking a conservative approach over this mid-year and of course over the next year and a half as well from a fiscal standpoint. That being said, you mentioned for direction and basically what we had discussed at that public meeting back in, I believe it was December. Just what I want to make sure we see is really a transparent process with adds and deletes and the opportunity for that to not be on the fly where residents don't have the opportunity to review ahead of time, but instead making sure that it's done, and that obviously requires some work from this council, if anybody on this council has any adds or deletes, to make sure it's getting in the agenda packet so that that the public can really see the discussion, because as brought up, there certainly were some adds and deletes that were brought up in December that I think it's important to discuss and really working to reflect the needs of the residents. And with that, I was happy to see there's a number of adds and deletes in this budget that did reflect some of those changes, which I think are helpful and fantastic. But I think it is important we have that fully transparent process ahead of time, and the public has the opportunity to see ahead of time which adds and deletes are going to be discussed and weighed.
Additional comments, questions from council? Seeing no hands up, thank you all very much, and this work session is adjourned.
Thank you.